Hi there. It's time for another Q&A, and I'm not going to do a lot of preamble. Let's just get right to it. We'll start with Randall Finch. He asks, "We know you love the new Dune movie, but is there anything about it that you don't like?" Yeah, there are a few things I'm not too fond of. I love Javier Bardem as an actor, and I think his performance is good, but he's a little mumbly, and that kind of bothers me. Also, the music is too loud. Don't get me wrong, I love the soundtrack. I love it a lot, but it's too loud and it blares over people mumbling like Javier Bardem, and they're saying weird words that people who aren't familiar enough with the book won't really be able to process. And even people who are familiar with the book like me, there were some words I'm like, wait, what? What was that? I don't remember that. I don't give it as much of a hard time for the ending as other people do. Maybe it's because I knew going into it this was just half a movie. But I also feel like there is an arc there. It starts with Duke Leto telling his son Paul that one day he's going to have to carve his own path towards leadership. He's going to have to figure it out for himself. And at the end of the movie, when he joins with the Fremen and decides against his mother's wishes to do that, to fight back, instead of escaping to Caladan, that's him picking up the mantle of leadership. That's the arc of the movie, and it makes perfect sense to me. I also like that it ends with a climactic knife fight. I mean, because, spoiler alert, that's how the whole book's going to end. So part two is going to have a similar ending. So, I mean, yeah, there are things I don't like about it, but still, 10 out of 10. It's not enough to overcome that. It's not even a 9.9 out of 10. It's still a 10 out of 10. So, there's that. Okay, next. Thomas Murphy asks, "What's your favorite episode of The Twilight Zone?" Wow, that's a hard question. I had to write down some because I had to really, really think about this one. So, the true answer is Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, but that doesn't technically count. It is an episode of Twilight Zone, but it wasn't made as an episode of Twilight Zone. If you don't know the story behind it, it was actually a French film based on a short story, and Rod Serling loved it so much he just repurposed it into an episode of the Twilight Zone. It's almost exactly the same thing. It's just as an episode of Twilight Zone instead of a French film. So that one doesn't really count. There's easy ones. There's ones that everybody always talks about. And these are great episodes. I love all of them. There's the Monsters of Maple Street, where everybody turns against each other out of paranoia. It's very Cold War inspired. I have The Beholder, of course. I don't even have to explain it to you. If you know what it is, you know. Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, Captain Kirk, Gremlin on the Wing. To Serve Man, that's probably the most iconic. That's the one everybody knows the punchline to. Time Enough at Last, I really like this one. This is where the guy can't get a break. He really just loves to read, and everybody tells him stop reading. His wife's nagging him about not reading, but that's all he wants. He just wants some time to read. And then a nuclear war happens. He's the sole survivor. He thinks, great, I can read whenever I want. I'll go to the library. And, then, there's a twist. Masks, which I like just because it's really, the visuals are really creepy. But those are like the main ones that people always talk about. But for me, there's a couple that I wanted to mention that aren't talked about as much and I think are really, really good. And I really wish people would talk about them more. Starting with The Midnight Sun. This episode is so dark. It's about basically the Earth has started spiraling in towards the sun, and it just gets hotter and hotter. And for whatever reason, in New York City, the sun never sets, so it's daytime all day long. And it's just the story of these two women in an apartment building trying to cope with the fact that the world is basically coming to an end as it gets hotter and hotter. So hot that, like, at one point, one of the girls puts her hand on a windowsill and it burns her hand. And again, at the end, there's another twist. I'm not going to spoil it, but it's a really good episode and really, really harrowing. When people tell me that old style TV was never as dark and depressing as stuff today, I would point them to this episode in particular. Similarly, there's an episode called Shadowplay, which I love because it's very meta. It's about a guy on death row who gets tried and sentenced to death on the same night. And he's telling everybody, this is all a dream, this doesn't make any sense. This is not how it's supposed to work. This is just how I know things work because I've watched TV. And as soon as you as soon as you try to kill me in the electric chair, everybody's going to die because you're all just characters in my dream. And I love it. I think it's so fascinating. And the way that people try to disprove him and the way he basically retorts back with logic is really interesting, and it's really fascinating, and you never quite know what's going on until you get to the end. And then last but not least, I wanted to talk about an obsolete man. This is Burgess Meredith. He's a librarian. He's in this totalitarian state. He goes before I forget what they call him, but he's basically a judge. And the judge tells him that he's obsolete, that we don't need librarians anymore because there are no books anymore, because the totalitarian state has outlawed books. So he says, okay, fine. I still stand by the fact that I'm a librarian, so you're just going to have to kill me. And in order to do that, they give him a choice of how he wants to die. He has to do it within 48 hours, I think. And he chooses to die in a certain way. And I'm not going to spoil it, but I just love it because it's so, I love dystopias and I love the idea of a totalitarian state. I mean, not in reality, but as a fictional thing, exploring totalitarian state dystopias. It's my jam. So yeah, those are my favorites. My true favorite is Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, but that's kind of a gimme. So if I had to pick another one, let me think for just a second. I'm gonna say Time Enough at Last. Yeah, that one. Okay, next is Numinous20111. Who's one of my patrons and who always comments on my videos, so thank you, Numinous. Is there a film that you love that you would in fact not want to review? Does reviewing something in any way change your pure enjoyment or engagement with a film? That in some way it spoils the simple, innocent experience of watching it? Really no. Like, when I started doing this channel, I was worried about that. I was worried that doing these reviews of movies that I love would change my love of those movies. That's only really happened once or twice. I don't like Close Encounters as much as I used to. I appreciate it more just for its place in sci-fi cinema history, but as a movie, its flaws seem to get bigger the older I get. And let's see, Westworld, I never saw Westworld before I did a video on it. So I can't say it changed my opinion of it, but I was really surprised at how much I didn't like it. And, well, there's one other, Logan's Run. I used to love Logan's Run, but I don't know, something about it just doesn't work anymore. But for the most part, when I do a review of a movie, I tend to love it more. The more I learn about it, the more I appreciate it, and the more it just speaks to me. So no, that doesn't happen. And there have been movies that I've reviewed that I've gone back and rewatched long after the review, and no, it hasn't hurt my enjoyment of the film. Okay, so No Market Media, you know these guys, they ask, thoughts on the 1984 sequel film 2010, The Year We Made Contact. I do plan on doing a video on this movie, so I'm not going to spoil it too much, but I will tell you I do like it. I like it a lot. 2001 is on record as being my favorite science fiction film, but 2010 is the one I'm more likely to watch. It's just more fun. It's definitely more Hollywood. It's not as artistic as 2001. But it does a really good job with the source material. It does a really good job adapting the book. And, you know, Roy Scheider, John Lithgow, Helen Mirren, what's not to love? So yeah, I do love it. And I'll talk more about that in a future video. I can't guarantee it's going to be anytime soon, but it's on my list. I say that a lot, don't I? Anyway, next, David Caron. You know, I've known this guy for 15 years. You think I'd know how to pronounce his name. Anyway, David says, how would you write the story for a new Dead Space game, ignoring the third one? Wow. Okay, Dead Space, if you don't know, is one of my favorite video game franchises. It's survival horror in space. And I love it. I love the story of it. The lore of it is very, very deep. It deals with issues of religion, and basically the whole thing is about the Fermi paradox. I mean, once you take the whole story of all three games and all the extended material, and you look at it as for what it actually is as a whole, the gestalt of it, it's all about the Fermi paradox. Like, which, if you don't know, the Fermi paradox is there should be intelligent life out there. Why haven't we found it? That's it. That's the Fermi paradox. It's not really a paradox, but maybe I'm a little biased about the term paradox. And Dead Space posits this really interesting answer that there is life out there, and that the life that's out there deliberately seeds other worlds in such a way that when they develop too fast, so they struggle for resources, and then they become this basically biomass, and that's when the event is triggered that turns them into necromorphs, which are, basically really cool zombies. And then these necromorphs basically just go around killing, and people go mad and they kill each other and they kill themselves, and everybody dies until there's this giant biomass of dead necrotic flesh that gets turned into this Brethren moon. And so they keep doing this over and over again throughout the galaxy. So that's why when humanity has gone out to the stars, we haven't found anybody. So how would I write a new game in that series? Now, you say ignoring the third one, but you can't ignore the third one. Sure, you can ignore what EA did to the third one, but you can't ignore the story. Because the story basically wraps it up. It explains everything I just told you. And you don't get that unless you play Dead Space 3. And that explanation is really satisfying. Like, I've gone back and played the first two games since 3, and it makes so much more sense. Everything fits perfectly, to the point where I am certain, absolutely certain, that when they wrote the original Dead Space, they had that ending in mind. Maybe not the whole arc of Isaac Clarke and all that, but they had the lore all worked out. So you can't mess with that. But if I were to write a new game now, I would set it after Dead Space 3, because I don't believe in retcons. I don't believe in soft reboots. I'm not a fan.
This isn't what happened last week. Have you all got amnesia? They just cheated us. This isn't fair.
So I would take it where it ends. And it ends, spoiler alert, with the Earth being overtaken by Brethren moons and Isaac seemingly lost. So what I would do is I would take it a few decades later, maybe, and tell the story of Isaac's daughter. It could be by Ellie, it could be by Nicole. There's definitely room in both, in the timeline for either. And his daughter, like him, becomes an engineer, and basically she lives in a galaxy that has been decimated by the Brethren moons. So there is no Earth. Earth is gone. And mankind is scattered throughout the galaxy, little pockets here and there. And they have to find new ways of harnessing energy, because if they use a marker, they're toast. So in this post-apocalyptic galaxy, you've got Isaac's daughter. And I would say a story where she is trying to track down her father. So then she's on this quest to find Isaac. Maybe she goes to Earth. I don't know. But she would go somewhere where there are necromorphs and there's a deep history. Something a lot like Tau Volantis, only maybe even more familiar because it would be an Earth city. She's trying to find Isaac. Maybe she finds him, maybe she doesn't. I don't really know. But she would basically have to figure out a way to shut off the markers, and that would be the real quest at the end. And of course, it would have to be mixed up in some weird psychological horror thing where she gets close to a marker and it messes with her head, and some things are real and some things aren't, and in true Dead Space fashion. But she would be isolated. She would be an engineer, not a fighter. So if she would use the classic weapons, things like plasma cutters, but she wouldn't use like an assault rifle. And she's not going to be attacking living humans. She's not going to be scoring headshots. Things like that. And it would be, you'd be able to expand the lore without sacrificing what came before it. Maybe she finds Isaac and Isaac is corrupted beyond recognition. Maybe he's become one of those necrologists, which is the replacement for the unitologists. Anyway, I could do this all day. I love Dead Space, and I would totally write a new Dead Space game, as long as EA had nothing to do with it, which unfortunately, EA has everything to do with Dead Space, and they're making a Dead Space remake, and I urge you, don't buy it. Instead, go buy the Callisto Protocol. I don't want to reward EA for what they did to Visceral Games. I mean, they basically bought the studio, gave them a bunch of money, allowed them to make Dead Space 2, and then told them how to make Dead Space 3, and basically ruined it. Then they blamed Visceral Games for Dead Space 3's failure and shuttered the studio. And it's not Visceral Games' fault. It's EA's fault. They should have shuttered themselves. So instead, buy Callisto Protocol, which is a game by the same designers of Dead Space, like some of the original designers. And it looks a lot like Dead Space, and give them your money instead, please. Okay, next question. John Davis asks, what is the air velocity of an unladen swallow? Cute. African or European? Okay. Okay, last question. This is from Chobtoons. Go check out his channel. Awesome stuff. Very funny. I'm sorry if you've talked about it somewhere else, but there are plenty of fine classic animated movies out there. Will you ever bring reviewing them into your over? You put that in my question just to see if I could pronounce it. I can't, okay? My over? Sure, that. My over. I've already done one. That one. Depending on how you want to call it. It's either La Planète Sauvage or Fantastic Planet. Also, I've got one coming really soon. I'm not entirely sure when this is going to drop, but I've got one coming in December. So look for that. It's an animated movie. It's not American again, but it's still an animated movie. And there are others that I want to cover. As long as it's over 30 years old and it's science fiction, yeah, I'll cover it. There's one that's been on my list forever, which is heavy metal. Because, come on, I'm a kid of the 80s. Of course I love heavy metal. And there's others that are on my list. I'll get to it. Yeah, there's other animated movies, sure. And that's it. So thank you for everybody who asked me questions. And I guess I'll see you next time.